Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Society of Design Arts, AIGA Baltimore, and Stevenson University for this online event about the Swiss grid presented by Angelina Lippert. My name is Raquel Castedo. I'm part of both AIGA Baltimore board and the Society of Design Arts, SODA. And this evening I will be wearing my AIGA's hat to share a little bit about our organization. But before I do that, we would love to hear where you're joining us from. So if you want to use the chat box and say hi and let us know, please feel free to do that. Hi, so we have someone from Brazil, Felipe.
I also see Patricia, who was one of the lenders to our show. So hi, Patricia.
Hello. Hi, Dean from Baltimore. Hello, Joel from Cincinnati. We have Steve from Ohio. Joe from Towson. Hi, Joe. Suzanne from Baltimore, Maryland. Hi, everyone. And Irene from Los Angeles. It's so good to have you all with us this evening. And so if you don't know AIGA, I'm gonna talk a little bit about it. And so AIGA is the largest professional association of designers in the world. And it is committed to advancing the value and impact of design, both locally and globally, and working together to inspire, support, and learn from each other at every stage of our careers. Our initiatives include Design for Democracy, Diversity and Inclusion, Design for Good, Women Lead, In-House Initiative, and Emerge 2.0. We invite you to learn more at aiga.org. Our 75 chapters are run 100% by volunteers, serving over 20,000 members across the nation. We are always looking for volunteers, speakers, and sponsors, so reach out if you want to get involved. Special shout out to all our AIGA chapter leaders, members, representatives from national, and especially the members of our local board of directors. For more information about our chapter, please visit baltimore.aiga.org. And if you're not local and are interested in getting involved in your local chapter, go to aiga.org and then check membership and find a chapter near you so you can learn about the benefits of becoming a member. This evening, we have with us Richard Stanley, a member of the Society of Design Arts, and he's gonna tell us a little bit about SODA. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Raquel, and welcome everyone to tonight's program. The Society of Design Arts was founded over 15 years ago by an all-volunteer group of teachers, students, and design professionals to further their interest in design history. One definition of design is a plan to make something, and we've expanded on that definition, whether it's a plan to make a better poster, a better building, or a better society. In more than 100 monthly programs, we've invited speakers on many diverse topics related to design, print, typography, architecture, and many more. For a better idea of our past programs, why not visit the poster gallery on sodabaltimore.com. And while you're there, sign up to be on our mailing list. That's the best way to stay current with upcoming programs. You can also check out the calendar of future events, both for SODA and related groups. We have many exciting programs coming up. On April 28th, Greg D'Onofrio will introduce his new book, Italian Types, Italian Graphic Designers in America. In May, we will have Ellen Lupton, and over the summer, an emphasis on Latin American design. So tonight, we're pleased to welcome Angelina Lippert, Chief Curator at the Poster House Museum in New York. Allow me to say personally that the Poster House Museum is well worth a visit to see their eclectic exhibits and poster collection, either in person or online. Their online lectures are frequently recorded and can be viewed on Vimeo. So the museum is the first in the country dedicated solely to the poster. Recent exhibitions have included, among others, Alphonse Mucha, Baptized by Beefcake, the golden age of hand-painted movie posters from Ghana. I missed that one. the letterpress posters of Amos Kennedy, Vera List, and the posters of Lincoln Center, and Julius Klinger, posters for a modern age. Angelina holds an MA in Russian avant-garde art from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, and a BA in theology and art history from Smith College. She's the author of the Art Deco poster and has lectured at SVA, Cooper Union, Columbia University, and the Sotheby's Institute of Art. She's a contributing writer to The Muse by the Clio Awards, where she focuses on the history of advertising design and is an editor for Vintage Poster magazine. So let's welcome Angelina.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was I always forget that my bio, I present a very long bio and I'm like, please shorten it. But hi, everyone. I'm Angelina Lippert, the Chief Curator of Poster House, as Richard said, the first and only museum in the country dedicated to posters. So tonight I'm going to introduce you to mid-century Swiss design. But before I do that, let me pull this up. I figured I would give you it would be useful for us to be on the same page regarding what a poster is and what a poster isn't. And there's no better way to do that than with a brief kind of primer on the advent of posters. So before we get into the Swiss stuff, just a quick this. So before the 1860s, advertising around the world was limited primarily to broadsides. So text-based announcements printed primarily in black or brown like these. Now, occasionally, there would be a tip-on, which is a separately printed piece of paper with an image on it, normally a woodblock image. So if you were selling shoes, you might have a very simple image of a shoe pasted into the open area on the paper. Or in this case, a woodblock recruitment poster where the image is actually a hand-carved design treated like raised type. Now, the problem with these broadsides was that they required that their audience be literate, which is really not something you can presume of all classes at the end of the 1800s in Europe. They were also really drab in color and lacked any kind of dynamism. So unless you were right up on them and a particular word caught your eye, they were pretty easy to ignore. So this image is meant to show you how overbearing and word heavy most of these images were. You can kind of see a few hints of what's to come. This image is actually a little later than the broadsides I just showed you, but you get a sense of how boring text ads are en masse. Of course, then, in the 1860s, Jules Charest, known today as the father of the poster, perfected the already developed method of stone lithography. So suddenly, large-scale color lithographs could be made cheaply and quickly, and thus color advertising was born. So a lot of historians refer to this time period, so the 1870s through 90s, as the color explosion, because that's exactly what it was. So now, whenever you walk down the street, you weren't confronted with rows and rows of drab text, but layer upon layer of colorful, brightly designed images jumping off the wall, sometimes 3 stories high. These pictures were so hard to ignore that some critics said things like these posters were assaulting their eyes, forcing them to look upon busty women selling cigarettes in cabarets. But others saw this moment as a triumph for public art. Because if you were not wealthy, the only other place you would have seen color like this would have been in a church's stained glass. Museums were not yet a common activity for the middle and lower classes, and newspapers weren't printed in color. So imagine an entire demographic of society being exposed to big, beautiful design en masse for the first time. It was a revolutionary moment. So now we're going to turn our attention to the Swiss grid. Now, to give you an overall idea of what this show was about, it explored how grid systems were developed, who practiced them, what their actual rules were, and how they became a lasting graphic design phenomenon. So this photo was right outside the gallery, so you get an idea of what the entrance to the show looked like. So of course we ask, why do a show on the Swiss grid? Well, since its birth in the early 1950s, no other graphic design tool has had a greater impact than the grid. Whether adhering to it, playing with it, or decrying it, pretty much all styles and movements since then in graphic design have been responding to that concept in some way. Mid-century grid systems were born out of a need for clarity and functionality in a country with 4 official languages, and it became a simple way to tackle issues of efficient mass communication. It also avoided referencing stylistic trends traditionally associated with any single other country. So it didn't look especially ethnic or tied to any one cultural identity. Therefore, it appeared universal, anonymous, and very modern. From there, it spread to all aspects of visual messaging, from book layouts to subway signs, to posters, to instruction manuals. In a fractured post-war era, the trilingual publications produced by the practitioners of this style spread around the world, becoming touchstones for modern design. And key designers published their own textbooks and took up teaching positions in Europe, the United States, India, Latin America, Japan, and beyond, ensuring that the next generation of graphic designers was familiar with the concept of the flexible grid. At the same time, multinational corporations also saw grid-based design as an efficient problem-solving device for the global market, allowing designers to be seen as communication engineers rather than just artists. So while current, more edgy design trends typically depart from the seemingly regimented mid-century outlook on design, the grid still remains a go-to tool for corporate and governmental communication, as no other graphic design system really offers such a rational versatility and unpretentious functionality when attempting to reach a mass audience. So in order for you to understand how big a departure and how big a deal grid systems were, you obviously need to know what came before. So since the 1880s, when posters really took off as a medium, Switzerland had already embraced a pretty cohesive illustrational aesthetic that set it apart from the rest of Europe. Around 1914, poster sizes within the country were standardized, known as the Welt format or world format poster. And rules were introduced establishing where posters could be officially displayed in public. Designers excelled at this classic illustrational poster, promoting tourism through sun-dappled landscapes and products through handsome renderings of goods. Text was typically expressive and artistically integrated into the composition, like in this piece. Most posters would also have to be redesigned in one or more of the country's 4 languages, which are German, French, Italian, and Romansh, and more if they were being shown outside of the country. They had to be printed in all 4 of those languages to meet governmental rules on advertising, which is an artistic challenge, as many translated words or phrases, they take up different quantities of space on a page. These are 3 examples of the same exact poster, as you can see. And the designer here is lucky because the text is at the bottom. But for many posters, the text went through the image entirely, so they'd have to redesign the poster each time and print it in a different language. And if you don't know how stone lithography works, every color is a different pass through the press. And if you don't line it up exactly, your entire design falls apart. So it is incredibly labor intensive, so much so that nobody really does it anymore. Now, by the 1950s, this illustrational style had kind of run its course. Idyllic imagery seemed dishonest in the post-war years, and companies within a newly unified Europe sought access to a growing international market as efficiently and cohesively as possible. Now, it's important to keep in mind, though, that posters like this didn't just disappear. They still happened. None of this is like a start-stop style situation. But the illustrational poster was no longer considered modern. So now we ask, why was grid-based design allowed to develop and flourish in Switzerland? While I talk about this, I'm going to cycle through a few pieces in the show. So here we have a piece from 1960 by Friedland Müller on the left, and a piece by Emil Ruder from 1957 on the right. So as a neutral territory, Switzerland was one of the few European countries to emerge relatively unscathed from World War II. Unlike its neighbors, its infrastructure had not been destroyed, its citizens had not been witness to mass bloodshed, and its economy had been steadily recovering since the crash in 1929. So foreign artists and innovators saw the country as a haven, taking up teaching positions in Zurich and Basel, where their forward-thinking ideas were nurtured. And a lot of people associated with the Bauhaus ended up migrating over to Switzerland, so you'll see some influence of that as well. So while the rest of the world recovered, Switzerland had the luxury of focusing on cultural growth. Here is Berlin by Emil Ruder from 1963 and Armin Hoffman's piece from 1960 on the right. So the government and professional organizations in Switzerland started sponsoring design competitions like the Best Swiss Poster, that is the actual name of the competition, which was established in 1941. And from that, they toured the winning designs both at home in Switzerland and abroad. And museums hosted exhibitions about new Swiss design, inviting artists to lecture and create catalogs and posters for the shows. And then design publications like Graphis, which was founded in 1944, also flourished, introducing Swiss graphics to the world through trilingual volumes in English, German, and French. Now, most of the winners of these competitions, as well as the people creating the exhibition posters and these new publications, they were professors at the biggest design schools in Switzerland. I'm going to butcher this in German, so forgive me. The Allgemeine Gewerbeschule in Basel and the Kunstgewerbeschule in Zurich. And at these places, grid-based design was being developed and taught. These numerous outlets allowed this particularly Swiss style to spread and saturate the international design community with unprecedented impact. By the late 1940s, homegrown companies with an eye for the increasingly international market, they wanted recognizable brand identities that kind of set them apart from the competition. And this crisp, easy to understand means of communication was at once particularly Swiss and also adaptable to any country. And so these brands turned to the professors in Zurich and Basel to define a new advertising age. So just in case that wasn't super clear, the big takeaway you should have is that the people creating the posters that won the competitions were also professors at the schools where they taught the style, and they were also hired by the museums and the cultural institutions to create the advertising posters for those exhibitions, as well as the catalogs and the exhibition design. And so you kind of end up with this giant incestuous cycle of perpetuating one harmonious design style within the only country in Europe that could spend the kind of money on producing cultural events of this magnitude. Oh, and in case you're wondering, this is a piece by Richard Podlosa from 1962. So now we're going to look at the two schools of thought around grid-based design, or at least what people think are the two schools of thought. And here we have Armin Hoffman's gorgeous 1959 poster for Giselle and Joseph Müller-Brockmann's poster for a 1972 production of Medea. Now, the Zurich and Basel camps of Swiss design can both be traced back to a single dude, and that is Ernst Keller. He taught at the Kunstgewerbeschule from 1918 to 1956, and he's often referred to as the father of Swiss style, having directly trained most of the key players who would go on to define this movement. Now, while he did not explicitly promote the use of grid systems, his teaching methods put communication first, focusing on typography over illustration. At the same time, post-war Zurich was a hotbed of artistic activity. As I mentioned, Bauhaus students like Max Bill promoted concrete art that, like De Stijl or constructivism, emphasized abstract geometry, while Jan Tschichold's highly praised 1928 publication, The New Typography, glorified asymmetry and photomontage in graphic communication. So these landmark influences put some of Keller's students in the perfect position to develop new design tools that stressed clarity of communication over everything else. And that was the flexible grid. Now, while no one person can claim to have invented Swiss style and its underlying grid systems, the two most noted figures in the field are obviously the guys here, Joseph Müller-Brockmann and Armin Hoffmann. Now, Müller-Brockmann quickly opened his own design agency after graduation and would replace Keller as the head of the design department in Zurich in 1956. He used both outlets to promote grid-based compositions, teaching his students a strict, almost religiously regimented method for properly using grids as a design tool. Now, meanwhile, Hoffmann took a position at the Schule für Gestaltung in Basel in 1947. Again, I apologize for my horrible German. Although he was attracted to grid systems, he felt that a designer should still have some freedom, often encouraging his students to play with various grids, even break them a little, in order to find a more harmonious end result. So these two artistic giants were neither the first nor the only designers to develop and promote this way of thinking about compositional structure. Other students of Keller's, like Herman Eidenbenz or Richard Prelosa, who did the tuba poster we saw earlier, they were experimenting with grids as early as 1947, predating Muller-Brockmann and Hoffmann's efforts. Now, by the mid-1950s, Carlo Vivarelli, Ernst Heistand, Hans Neuberg, they were building on these ideas in Zurich, while Emil Reuter and Max Schmidt and Karl Gerstner and others were adapting grid systems of their own in Basel. So all of their ideas about grid systems are different, and they're all practiced a little differently. So don't think of grids as restrictive. Think of them as liberating, as a foundation for freedom, because that's how these guys saw them. I'm going to focus for a second on Muller-Brockmann's series for Musica Viva. These 3 posters were created within 2 years of each other for the same event, and they perfectly display Muller-Brockmann's personal evolution with the grid. These are 3 letterpress posters that, when seen together, demonstrate the flexibility of grid systems from a combination of 3 columns and precisely measured geometric images to a monolithic block of solid text to 2 separate columns of differing weights. A colleague of Brockmann's, Vivarelli, told him that even the use of pure geometry was too subjective, and he should turn the text itself into the image and nothing more. So the latter 2 posters, the 2 on the right, which are printed 2 months apart, highlight the title of the series along with the most important performers, emphasizing them through the use of red rather than the music they would be playing. By not using capital letters, the spaces between the lines of text and the letter forms themselves are more comfortably condensed, creating a weightier block of information. This is underscored by the parentheses, which are in a slightly smaller point size than the rest of the text. And most printers would not have really had enough wood or plastic type in a single size of Accidents Grotesque to create such a word-heavy poster. So that in and of itself is actually quite notable. And that's how Brockmann worked with the grid. Now, while posters from each school can appear quite similar, designers from Basel, like Armin Hoffmann's 2 posters here, typically show a preference for high contrast photography and more artistically placed lettering, while those from Zurich, like this poster by Robert Buchler, traditionally use less photography, especially after the 1960s, and adhere to the grid pretty much at all costs. Now, while Reuter and his students promoted the Univers typeface, both camps leaned heavily on either hand-cut lettering when there was large type that was unavailable in Accidents Grotesque or Accidents Grotesque. And despite popular myth, Helvetica was not commonly used in posters until the 1980s. Now, putting aside these differences, the general concepts behind grid systems and design remain the same. It all begins with planning. Now, look at this poster by Karl Gerstner and Marcus Cutter from 1958. What is the problem you need to solve? What is the message you want to present? With those 2 questions in mind, the designer starts by determining how many fields are needed to compose the appropriate grid. There could be as few as 2 if you split the page in half. They do not all need to be the same size, but the smallest field should correspond to the smallest design element, either the text or the image. The type and the image should never really touch, allowing for optimal clarity. Obviously, they break that suggested rule here. And 20 or 32 fields are generally considered to be the ideal number, allowing for ample placement options without creating visual clutter. And each composition, however, is unique and calls for its own grid system and grid analysis, forcing the designer to be a mathematician and a visual architect as he builds the page. So this rational approach to composition prioritizes clarity of communication. So maintaining the clarity through the creativity is the art. Now, this is like my absolute favorite poster to talk about in the show. It's by Emil Reuter. It's from 1958. And it promotes an exhibition of newspaper history at the Gewerbe Museum in Basel. Now, due to the close relationship between the museum or various museums and schools in Switzerland, this poster would have been executed by Reuter's students as part of like an in-class assignment, with each student working on a single element. As the school only had smaller printing presses, the poster is made up of 2 sheets of paper. You can kind of see the line running horizontally across the middle of the image. Now, there are 4 different things happening in this poster. The Z, the big Z on the left, that's hand-cut linoleum. Type was definitely not available in that size typically. So if you got really, really close, that you would see a ton of irregularities and moments where the designer like hesitates or goes back in the line as he's cutting out the Z. Then the small text below that that's metal type. But the text to the right, that's wood type. Metal type would have been like pretty heavy and brittle at that size, so they would have used wood. Now, finally, the halftone photo blow up, that's not a photo at all. It's hand-picked linoleum made to look like a photo, which like blows my mind every time I see it. So Reuter was a total jerk as a teacher and assigned a student to cut little squares at various densities to create the look of a photo. And all of this was in one letterpress lockup. Incidentally, to get this flat a black on the Z, you'd have to run it through the press twice. So like, again, miracles are happening. Now, obviously, for every moment, there's like a counter moment. So while the rational orderliness of Swiss style spread around the world, some designers within the country grew tired of this seemingly rigid approach to graphic composition. Students of mid-century masters like Wolfgang Weingart and Rosemary Tisi, both shown here, began pushing the limits of flexible grid structures, adding a playfulness and a spontaneity to their designs, especially with regard to typography. Others, like Nicholas Troxler, looked back to illustrational posters of the pre-grid era for inspiration, ignoring mid-century techniques entirely. But by the mid-1970s, a rebellious group of Swiss poster artists were creating experimental images that allowed for fluctuating depth, undulating surfaces, and a rainbow of colors. But they were all still bound to that welt format size. So these new posters are clearly Swiss, but rather than communicating through a system of order and restraint, their imagery explodes off the page, often confounding the eye with like a jumble of colorful information. And these designers, in this case, these are both by Martin Woodley, were on the cutting edge of new technology, stretching and blurring text and image through the use of process cameras and later through digital software like Photoshop. So where mid-century posters were quiet, these designs are visual exclamation points. So that is the brief summary of mid-century Swiss posters that I was preparing, and then we were going to go into stuff at Poster House. But Richard, I think you wanted to take questions before I went on to that part. Richard.
Yep, had to unmute myself. Didn't want to interrupt inadvertently. I don't see any open questions right off the bat. This has been a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. There was a number of different points that I particularly looked at, going way back to the beginning when you were talking about that pasted in image, the tipped in image.
Oh, the tip-ons, yeah.
Eagle or whatever, reminds me of the posters that went that Hoffman did, for example, for the different museum shows where they would have a blank area left in it, and then they would come back and imprint the information specifically for the dates and times and so forth. Yeah.
So if you in these posters, if you look at the like those little where it indicates that there's a rectangle like in the upper right or the lower left, that's where they would put a like a sheet of paper that with like that week's performances, and then they would paste over them. So really you were creating like an economy of scale with the posters, because you would print like 2,000 of that and you wouldn't have to print anymore. Like, so it saved a lot on printing costs, which most of these guys are really all about, like economy of printing.
Right. Yeah, that was one point. There got a couple of questions come up here. Let's see, what were the two forms of the Swiss grid?
Well, so it's not really just two forms. I mean, the myth is that there's the Basel school and the Zurich school, but every practitioner within those camps had their own take on the flexible grid system. It's just that, like, stereotypically, Zurich was more regimented, with Muller-Brockmann kind of dictating a more strict adherence to a grid. The description I gave of like dividing stuff into 32, or I think it's like 32 or 27 like sections, that's really mostly from his camp of thought. Whereas Armin Hoffman and Basel was a little bit more flexible. Like, you'll see that the logo, particularly in these posters by Armin Hoffman, the name of the theater in the upper right, it does not match the way it's done on the other poster. Like the T is much larger in the poster on the left than it is in the poster on the right. And he also like does that like side dash and puts the year. which he doesn't do in the title section of the poster on the left. So like he's much more playful and creative about it. He actually called the poster on the right, he always referred to that as his feats poster. So the show came to us from Tom Strong up in New Haven. He has an amazing collection of mid-century Swiss posters. So, and Tom knew all these guys. So like he would like give us stories of what they would say to him when some of them were teaching at Yale. So it was great insider information.
Given those two schools of thought, shall we say, have you noticed a progression over time in terms of how they've handled the grid? I mean, from the rigidity, has that gotten more flexible in Zurich and in Basel, where it was always fairly freer, much freer? Have they become, in their own way, the two of them more together? Are they?
Well, I think it's more. I don't think it's just. It's no longer just based in Zurich and Basel. Like as everything gets more global, like a lot of these designers are not based in those two cities. But yeah, I mean, look, if you look at Weingart's and TC's posters, like they don't really look a thing like each other. And by the time we get to Martin Woodley's stuff, which is from like 2003, and I think these are both from 2003. Like there is a grid in there, but damn, it is a creative approach to a grid. Yeah, so I think that they like to play with the concept, but it's no longer but it's like, how far can I push this, but it's still this, but without breaking it.
Right. Remind me of the name, but recently Poster House did the online webinar with the Swiss poster designer that was working with the big lino cuts. It was just a couple of months ago. Duffy.
Oh, Daffy Kuhne.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Daffy Kuhne is awesome.
That was excellent, and well worth taking a look at the video online if people are interested in kind of the progression of the idea of this.
Yeah, because he's basically at the forefront of like the latest, like the cutting edge of Swiss posters. The stuff he does with letterpress and the creative approach he has to it, like he'll use like Elmer's glue to make like something type high and print the like swishes in the Elmer's glue, or he'll use magnets to lock up the letters. It's just chef's kiss.
Here's a question. Have you ever seen a manifesto or formal description of the dogma for the grid system? In many years of learning and teaching design, I've not seen anything like that.
Oh yeah, there's the Muller Brockman. There's this whole like how-to book.
Yeah,
I think it's Muller Brockman. Greg D'Onofrio, who I know is watching, would know this better than I would. But I believe when I was writing the show, it was Muller Brockman's book that has like the whole dogma laid out.
Reuter's book on typography too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there are a bunch.
Okay, well, there are a couple of other. Do we have a preference for Hoffman or Brockman?
I have no preference. The next option is to just flip through some pieces, to just let you guys know what the museum has done other than this show.
Right.
We've only been open since June of 2019, so it's a short presentation.
I don't see any active questions, but I have a couple. I've been wondering, with your collection, how do you acquire your posters? Are they through donation, through sale, or purchase?
All of the above. We have an Acquisitions Committee, so if someone wants to donate stuff to us, they have to like go through them, but it's very simple. It's like, does Angelina like it? Can I use it? Great. But I also, I purchase specifically for shows. So if I'm doing a show on men's fashion, I'm looking for posters on men's fashion. So we do our exhibition calendar about 5 years in advance. So I know exactly what I need to be shopping for. I also have like wish list shows of like things I would like to do, but that I know take a long time to find. I was a dealer for a decade before I switched into academia. So I kind of am very familiar with the poster market, which is great. So for example, the show that we're going to be opening in September is on pushpins. So Milton Glaser, Seymour Quast, John Alcorn, all those beautiful illustrational poster designers. And there are some posters that like Milton Glaser's archive didn't have. So we've been on the hunt and we've gotten some of them. So yeah, that's how we acquire.
Okay. Question. How did the Swiss grid influence American poster makers in the 80s and 90s, like April Greiman and others?
Was that a question from Greg? I feel like
No, that you haven't heard from him yet. No, that was from Ed Berlin.
Well, have you read Greg's book? Because he has a whole book on basically the American, the like Swiss design structures that influenced American design. He did it with Stephen Heller. It's a great book.
The moderns.
Yes, the moderns. I was about to call it the Americans. I'm like, no, that's a TV show. It's not the Americans. Yes, the moderns. That gives you everybody who is influenced by these guys, and how the American twist on a lot of this. Our like corporate advertising really, corporate communication really latched onto grid systems. So like AIGA, the product design that Greg has in that book is like, what? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay, let's see. One last one here before I ask you to give us a little brief overview of what the Poster House is up to in the past and what's coming up in the future. This was just a question from Dean Nettles. Why not have lowercase numerals on Joseph Miller Brockman's all-type posters?
You mean like a Roman numeral? Like what do you mean a lowercase, like I don't know what a lowercase 3 looks like. You mean like a Roman numeral, right?
Well, you'll have to
like I don't know that there are upper and lowercase numbers, so there
okay,
are.
Well, maybe Dean will clarify that for us.
Like
when we ask you to.
There are no upper and lowercase numbers, right? Like I haven't gone my entire life not knowing this, right?
No, I don't.
Okay, I'm like, wait.
Okay, anyway, let's go back to your, for one thing, we definitely want to
the way on me.
We got a lot of interest coming in. Tell us a little bit about the museum in terms
Sure.
of
okay, so Poster House, obviously, first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. We opened in June of 2019. So we try to bring like new life to how revolutionary so many posters were for their time. So we're like constantly trying to push the medium forward and expand the possibilities of what people think of when they think of graphic design. So these images were part of our inaugural exhibition on Alphonse Mucha, which was called Alphonse Mucha Art Nouveau Nouvelle Femme, which was the show we opened the museum with. I wanted to go with something that was obviously people were super familiar with, so that would be a very splashy opening. At the same time, we juxtaposed that with a show on the East Berlin design duo Cyan, and how they were some of the first designers to use Photoshop in advertising posters. So these images were all promoting cultural events in Germany immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this and the Mucha show, they're 100 years apart, but they both were exploring technical innovation in poster design and how the medium has evolved since it was born. So I thought they were really good, like point counterpoint. We then did a show that you mentioned earlier, Baptized by Beefcake, which kind of focused on the fascinating history of Ghanaian hand-painted movie posters for imported American action and horror films and their relationship with local religious traditions. Trust me, it's like way too long for unless I get an entire lecture to explain it, but it was bananas and amazing. And at the same time, to counter this, in our lower level gallery, our collections manager presented a history of protest symbols as shown through posters for the 2017 Women's March. So these two shows, the Ghanaian show and this show, they kind of stretched the traditional notion of what qualifies as a poster, especially a poster of value. So we at Poster House, we see posters, all posters, as having the ability to tell a story, and we make that a goal within all of our exhibitions. And then right before the pandemic shut us down about a year ago, we had just opened the Sleeping Giant Posters in the Chinese Economy, which was an exhibition that explored about 100 years of Chinese posters through the lens of its ever-changing economic system. So this was the main show that was on view at the same time as the Swiss Grid. Then, as soon as we were able to reopen to the public in the fall, I decided to activate our entry foyer, where we are going to be holding like little mini exhibitions on a rotating basis. So our inaugural show in the space was dedicated to Amos Paul Kennedy Jr., who's a letterpress printer based in Detroit, and the posters he makes primarily for Black cultural events in the rural South. Then just a few weeks ago, we opened 3 new exhibitions. So the largest show is this one. It's on loan from the Wolfsonian in Miami Beach, Florida, and it looks at the designer Julius Klinger. So taught by some of the leading secessionists, Klinger approached posters differently than many of his contemporaries. So he's blending elements of Japanese woodblock prints, Art Deco lettering, secessionist decoration, all within the newly defined genre within German and Austrian poster design known as Plakatstil. Using flat, saturated planes of color and bold outlines, simplified spatial relationships. These posters kind of mix humor and advertising in a style that was very uniquely German. And his career doesn't stop there, though, as he was constantly evolving his style to keep up with new design trends. So when Lucien Bernhardt invented the object poster, Klinger tried his hand at that approach to advertising, only showing the object for sale in pure geometry alongside some advertising text. And then from there, his work got more modern, being reduced to just like black and white, and further reducing figures and forms to their geometric shapes, creating logotypes that strongly influence today's concept of corporate branding or corporate logos. And then at the same time, in our lower level gallery, we just opened a show called Freak Power, which explores the writer Hunter S. Thompson's run for sheriff of Aspen in 1970, and how the seeds of that campaign spawned a political movement that is still relevant today. And many of the posters in this show promote ideas and ideals that are still hot button topics today, from environmental issues to police brutality to voter registration to nuclear disarmament. And then finally, back at that entry foyer where the M.S. Kennedy show was, we just partnered with Lincoln Center on the show exploring the early advertising posters they created with some of the leading artists in the world, from Marc Chagall to Andy Warhol. So that is the briefest of overviews of Poster House. Stop sharing now. Hello.
Great, that's terrific. We had one question here that people would like to know where they can find the video recordings, the Vimeo recordings of past presentations.
Hold please. I can get you there. It's the Poster House Vimeo page, so it's video. You can see all of our things. I'm going to put it in the chat in a second. There we go. Great. All right. It's coming for you.
Good.
There you go.
All right. All right. Well, this has been.
And we do talks pretty much. We do talks pretty much every night of the week. So I would definitely check out our events page, because I'm talking all the time.
We definitely do have a lot of events. We try to keep them posted on the calendar for SOTA so that people can find them there as well. I'm behind. You keep putting them out programs faster than I can get them up online, but we'll do our best. So anyway, I don't see, I think there was one question about telling us a little bit more about the Reuter Z poster.
What do you want to know? I love that poster. It's the best.
There was nothing in addition to that, but it is. I did not know that that was a hand done piece of linoleum on the illustration.
It was so cool. So at the opening, we had like some of the greatest, like a lot of scholars that I totally respect. So we had like Greg D'Onofrio, we had Paul Shaw, we had Tom Strong. We're all like nerding out on these posters and like watching a few of these guys debate over like how they know it's hand-picked linoleum, or how they know that this thing was possibly ruby lith versus hand-cut linoleum. Like it was like a joy. It was the joy of my life. But yeah, looking at these posters in person is so much better than looking at them on the screen. You can really see the hand of the person who made them, because these were still, this is like very pre-digital. You can still see the mistakes. You can still see the hesitance. It's fabulous.
I'm curious. And all of the early posters were sans serif. The ones, the Swiss early, Keller, etc. onward, where the big type or even the smaller type was hand cut linoleum. I'm wondering.
It's just the big type.
Was it just the big type? I mean,
yeah. If it's like normal size type, it was either metal or wood. It's only for those giant letters that would have been impossible to.
Well, in some of those, there's a lot of irregularity in the lettering, and I'm just curious whether it was easier, as stylistically, to cut a sans serif letter in linoleum than it would have been to cut a serif letter, and so that's why would that have been an influence on the popularity of sans serif as opposed to serif?
Maybe.
Just a conjecture.
I think that's a Paul Shaw type historian question, not an Angelina poster historian question.
Okay. Well, here's one you can answer. Someone wants to know how we can support the museum.
Come visit me.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, go on our website. We have all the things we do. We really do programming almost every night. We have an Instagram account, Poster House NYC. I usually do daily poster videos. They are currently on hiatus, so you know, tell my boss you want them back if you want them back. But yeah, we're everywhere.
All right. All right. Well, I'm just checking here. I don't see anything. I love your thought process. Do you have a blog or social media presence where you share your thoughts on design?
Poster House NYC. It's the Instagram account is mostly run by me, so it's mostly my thoughts on design.
All right. Great. Well, I think that that does a great ending point for us, and it's been a terrific presentation. I really enjoyed it. We've had so much interest in it, and I hope people come back when we get you back to talk more about MUCA and some of the other things coming up. We would certainly like to know a little bit more about your book, the Art Deco poster, and maybe you could tell us just a little bit about that.
Now?
If you like.
Oh, sure. I wrote it a long time ago, but I had access to the greatest collection of Art Deco posters in the country, and they asked me to write the book. So I'm pretty sure it's still in print, but you never know.
All right.
It's definitely in our gift shop. I know that the museum sells it, but I mean, I wrote it like fresh out of college. It's been a while.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great evening. Once again, welcome to the group, and we're glad to see you and hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much, Angelina. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Was such an amazing presentation, and the introduction about the posters, poster design in general for me, was really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us this evening, and thank you everyone for joining us. Angelina, would you like to say share final thoughts? Before saying
thank you all for coming. Thank you. I love doing this. I love seeing people that are enthusiastic about design, so this is always great. Thank you so much.
Amazing, thank you. So in April, as Richard mentioned, we're going to have Greg Donofrio giving a talk on one of his recent books. We'll also have in April AIGA's Baltimore Ink and Pixels. And if you don't know, Ink and Pixels is one of the AIGA Baltimore's largest events focused on helping designers prepare for a career or a career shift. You can sign up by April 10 for portfolio reviews. And starting in May, we will have a series of events dedicated to history of Latin American design. So if you'd like to be notified about our upcoming events, find out about our community events, or read about our most recent news, please sign up to our mailing lists, both at AIGA, baltimore.aiga.org and sodabaltimore.com. Thank you again for spending time with us this evening, and be sure to follow us on social media. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.